the DoT team was dead. But finally, with the introduction to Kafka's buffs and also Hysilens on the horizon, that might change. Today we'll be breaking down what did change, why DoT as an archetype did fall off, and how Hysilens might actually bring it back for good, especially alongside the great Kafka buffs. Starting it off with why DoT fell off. Of course, with the general HP inflation and DoT not doing as much damage as other characters can dish out, it was naturally already going to fall behind. Kafka, who was the enabler for this archetype, was showing great signs of age, especially with how her kit did work. DoT functions as an archetype that doesn't really do damage on hit, but rather the proc of the actual damage over time effects such as wind shear, bleed, burn, shock, and so on. Original Kafka had her base kit while also only being able to proc dots on enemies with her skill, and her follow-up attack was only once that would only be able to be procced when you did use a basic attack with someone else on the team. The basic attack did limit a lot to what Kafka could do because a lot of times you want to spam skill as much as you can with these DoT characters, primarily someone else like Black Swan, because with the skill usually it is fully blast, and you want to have as many DoT stacks on as many enemies as possible. So due to the fact that you did actually have to use a basic attack to proc the follow-up attack from Kafka, that was already a big downside, and at the same time, the follow-up attack did not actually proc the DoT at the time, so the only form of being able to make enemies receive DoT from a proc would be Kafka's skill. So even with the cornerstone of the DoT team being Kafka, her signs of age, especially during the 2.x and early 3.x era, was already very much shown. To pair alongside this, DoT as an archetype for other characters was not strong either. The only other character you could really use that was considered strong would be Black Swan, and Black Swan wasn't able to be fully utilized as well, as it was very hard to fully stack Arcana stacks anywhere that wasn't pure fiction or simulated universe. You wouldn't really be able to get too many Arcana stacks in MLC or especially APOC as well, so a lot of her kit was very much gated as you only really had Shock and Wind Shear. Every other character that was DoT based were usually 4 stars and were just not worth using anymore because they just would not be able to compete. So often you would have to run a full sustain list or just slot in a support, and the only way to have a real third strong option was to get a very high invested team, which did include an E2 Xiaochu, which made his actual DoT a lot stronger and made him a viable option on the team. But even with a Black Swan and an E2 Xiaochu, Kafka herself being the cornerstone did not really help. Again, her kit was very outdated, not being able to proc dots as much as she should. Having the restriction to only basic attack for the follow-up attack was very annoying. To pair alongside all this was also the enemy designs. If an enemy were to act too much, they would be able to exhaust the stacks you do have on the DoT debuffs, and also essentially be able to kill you a lot faster. While there is also the flip side, if an enemy acted too little, you would have no form of doing damage and it would take a long time for dots to even proc, since once again the only way you could actually do it on your turn is using Kafka's skill. So waiting for an enemy for the DoT debuffs to go ahead and activate to do damage on an enemy that was super slow, you can guess what happens. They're not really going to take much damage since you are not being able to do any damage since all the damage would be gated from the DoT procs. So not only is an enemy that is super fast a problem, an enemy that is super slow is a problem. You have to get an enemy that attacks at the right times, you have to play it properly, manage your skill points well. You have to do a lot of effort to get very minimal results that can very much go wrong. And to top it all off, DoT overall eventually ended up not doing too much damage because in the beginning I mentioned HP inflation, and that is also the reason. DoT very much just could not be up to par anymore and was overshadowed, had its internal issues, and no longer was good. But then we take a look at the buff era in the 3.4 update, which introduced 4 characters getting buffed and one of them was Kafka. Kafka was shifted to become even more of a cornerstone of the DoT team than she already was, fixing a lot of issues she did have and fixing out her whole playstyle. Rather than properly building her as a DoT character, now you really want to build her as a very fast attacking character that gets as much turns as possible, and also being a support, as that is what her role is shifted as. Kafka has become the cornerstone by being the character that still procs the dots a lot more frequently than she would previously, while also being able to give her teammates a big attack increase, increasing the amount of damage the dot would do overall. So becoming the character that is going to proc the most dots, especially on your own turn, and also being the one to support your teammates. She was still able to produce all the dots currently placed on the enemies to produce the damage from her skill, and one of the biggest changes were that the fact that her follow-up attack now had 2 charges. and was no longer gated to basic attacks, meaning if you hit them with an ultimate, you hit them with the skill, she is going to be able to launch her follow-up attack. One of her bonus traces also did get buffed, which now allowed her talent's follow-up attack to cause the DoT debuffs currently placed on the target to immediately produce damage equal to 80% of the original damage, meaning she was no longer restricted to just her skill being the proc for the DoT, but it also now applied to her follow-up attack, so you now had 2 charges to your follow-up attack and also letting the follow-up attack be able to produce the DoT effects. This was a significant change to her because now not only is she giving your other DoT characters a big attack percent increase, which is fantastic for any DoT character's damage, as that is really the only way to increase it. You also now had more ways to produce the DoT effects, thanks to the fact now that her talent's follow-up attack was now able to do it, plus the ability to have 2 charges rather than just 1. And your teammates were no longer gated to using a basic attack. You were now able to have her talent's follow-up attack trigger by just someone hitting a primary enemy. On top of that, her early investments with her E1 and E2 were changed to be a lot better, so if you happen to have those are also much better now. And so, Kafka with her buffs solidified herself as a cornerstone of DoT once again. Now we also introduce Hysilens to the equation. Kafka herself was very strong, was going to make DoT relatively strong once again, and Hysilens herself was proven to be a extremely strong DoT character herself, which works absolutely fantastic with Kafka, while also working fantastic with Black Swan. Hysilens herself gets a big benefit from Kafka giving her the attack percent buff, which is going to be major for Hysilens' damage. Hysilens' ultimate is a zone that makes enemies take more damage by lowering their defense, and also makes enemies do less damage by lowering their attack, which is great for DoT's survivability. Her skill is fully AoE that makes enemies take 20% more damage as well. So she has multiple ways to make your DoT characters do even more damage to the enemies, while also being a fantastic DPS herself. And the absolute best part is she is able to inflict every single kind of DoT on the enemy thanks to her talent. Not only her, but her teammates as well. Her talent states that when allied targets attack, there is a 100% base chance for Hysilens to inflict wind shear, bleed, burn, shock on the hit enemy, which will prioritize different states. This was absolutely fantastic because now Kafka is going to be able to produce DoT effects of practically every single DoT in the game, thanks to the fact that Hysilens was able to inflict them. This amplified DoT's potential damage by a significant amount, and due to the sheer amount of DoT stacks you can have on enemies thanks to Hysilens' talent, the proc you can get from Kafka's skill and also her follow-up attack lets you produce multiple effects of DoTs from multiple different sources, leading up to insane damage output. Best part is, this also does apply to when enemies attack, because that's usually when DoTs go ahead and activate, but again, you can produce them with the effect of Kafka's skill and her follow-up attack. Not only that, but Hysilens added another effect which further amplified her role on the team, which now allows her ultimate, thanks to one of her bonus abilities, to immediately deal damage equal to 150% of the original damage of all the DoTs currently applied on enemies. Her ultimate is also fully AoE, so that applies to everything on the field. So not only is she being able to inflict a bunch more DoT effects onto the enemies, she herself has the ability to proc them with her ultimate. So it's not only gated to Kafka now, Hysilens herself is now able to do it. So you add in a character that has fantastic debuffs that benefit DoT characters a lot with defense, shred, and vulnerability. You give her the ability to inflict multiple stacks of every single DoT type in the game, and also allow your allies to inflict it as well, not just her, being fully AoE and also giving her the ability to also be able to proc them with her ultimate. Especially with the buff Kafka, you had a monster pairing of the DoT team, which single-handedly revived it with the buff Kafka and Hysilens. Now, another thing you may want to consider is the fact that Hysilens now also being able to inflict every single DoT was perfect for none other than Black Swan herself as well. As I mentioned previously, Arcana was very much restricted by the fact that Kafka plus Black Swan can only really inflict shock and wind shear and nothing else, and not have too many stacks of it. Arcana itself to this day is a very strong mechanic, just not being able to be utilized fully. Now, with the addition of Hysilens being able to produce all these different kind of effects of DoT and placing them onto the enemy, you now can get infinitely more Arcana stacks than you were previously, which now also skyrockets the value of Black Swan on these teams. So not only did Hysilens bring back DoT, especially with the addition of Kafka buffs, those two are already going to be able to fully bring back the team. If you do introduce Black Swan with the addition of being able to have a bunch more Arcana stacks than she was being able to previously, you now had the triple DoT trio being able to fully thrive off each other, having a bunch of different sources of DoT every single version, thanks to Hysilens' talent, having Kafka being able to proc more sources of DoT, thanks to her buffs giving her 2 axes to follow up attacks and also them being able to proc the DoT and also the same one on the skill, Hysilens herself being able to be fully AoE and having another proc on her ultimate, and now you had Hysilens making Black Swan's absolutely broken Arcana stacks become a lot easier to stack, making it that much stronger. This synergy straight up revived DoT, and these 3 are going to be an insanely strong trio going forward. To bring the video to an end, I wanted to give my final thoughts. As someone who witnessed DoT when it was at its strongest, and also witnessed DoT when it was at its lowest, I definitely think Kafka being the cornerstone once again with the buffs was very much to bring the team to a state where it was able to clear, but definitely would fall off really quickly. But with the addition of Hysilens, I think the team itself is going to be insanely strong in the current meta. The damage you are able to produce with the DoT effects, especially having multiple ways to produce the effects rather than just waiting for the enemy to act, is one of the biggest buffs it could have got. One of the biggest drawbacks were, once again, as I mentioned previously, having to wait for the enemies to act, and if they were too slow, that was a problem. If they were too fast, it's a problem. Now, there are multiple ways to have it on your turn being able to produce the effects, letting you do a bunch of damage. Kafka being able to buff these characters a lot is super good at the same time. Hysilens giving you access to every single DoT, multiple stacks of it, and having great debuffs, and also bringing back Black Swan due to the fact that Arcana is now going to be insanely stronger, because you were able to have a bunch more Arcana stacks than you were previously, as you are no longer gated to just wind shear and shot. With these 3 in mind, the addition of Kafka buffs and the addition of Hysilens as a full character, DoT itself, even on your procs, even on the enemy's turns, are able to deal upwards from 600-700k damage, and on Hysilens' ultimate can even do over 1 million. DoT now is going to be insanely strong, and potentially can be another archetype that could be worth investing in. If you're someone that already was invested into DoT and had to unfortunately deal with the drawbacks of the whole archetype, you are going to get a significant upgrade with the addition of Hysilens and also the Kafka buff. And if you're someone that has been interested in going into DoT but you just didn't want to due to the fact that it was super low, now with these additions, if you invest properly, get Hysilens, get Kafka if you don't already have her. You don't even have to get Black Swan, but she can be a great addition with, again, her Arcana stacks being good now. You are going to have a very, 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 very powerful team in today's meta, as you are no longer gated on waiting for the enemy to act, having multiple sources being able to proc the DoTs on enemies, and not just limited to Kafka herself anymore. And this does wrap up the entire video. If you did watch the entire video, I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, shape, or form, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all other types of Star Rail content. Comment down below what you think about the DoT team, and if you guys think they're going to hold up well, and if they're really strong now. Feel free to discuss, and I'll see you later. Peace out.